people, welcome back to the Knots Cave. Today we're going to be taking a look at the top 5 worst games ever released for the Sega Saturn in PAL territories as reviewed by the official Sega Saturn Magazine. Now, back in the day when we used to pick up these lovely games for systems in the 90s, there wasn't really much of an internet full of gaming reviews and opinions like there is today, so we had to get our information from monthly publications like Games Master, CVG, the official Sega Saturn Magazine, which is one of my favourites by the way, and magazines like Edge. So obviously you used to wait, and once a month you'd read the reviews and you'd save up the money for your paper round and you'd pick that game up that they gave 5 stars or they gave 90% and you'd avoid all the pooey games. Okay, Sega Saturn Magazine helped me avoid all these pooey games, and I played some truly beautiful games based off their reviews back in the day. But today we're going to be taking a look at the 5 worst games as rated by them, and also I'll do a little review while we're going and see if I have the same opinion they had. Anyway guys, let's jump straight into the number 5 spot and check out the 5th worst game ever released on the Sega Saturn in the UK. So yes, here we are at the number 5 spot, and the first game we're going to be taking a look at, people, is Trash It on the Sega Saturn. One of the later titles, but it's a bad one, people, so let's have a look. Trash It was developed by Rage Software and published in 1997 by GT Interactive. Trash It is a 2D destruction based platformer where you just have to smash blocks up, clear away the rubbish and make it to the exit. Simple sounding premise. The game was reviewed by Sega Saturn Magazine in issue number 26 and given the dismal score of just 39%. This is what Sega Saturn Magazine had to say.
This game is so disappointing. We could forgive the bland graphics if the game was fun to play, but it's not. A game that appears in the shops without us being sent a review copy is a surefire sign of impending disaster.
The back of the box reads, Trash It is an orgy of destruction and will set pulses racing in the most original arcade action in recent years. Yeah, right. Based on the exploits of Jack Hammer, Trash It offers the players the opportunity to destroy mammoth buildings, monumental structures and pulsating power plants in the ultimate frenzy of devastation and vandalism. Your palms will sweat, your veins will bulge as you go through level after level of challenging gameplay. Be big, be bold, and choose a weapon to bring the house down. I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty sure I just played and reviewed a completely different game to the one described on the back of that box. The game itself has a colour palette that is just the worst I've ever seen in my life, featuring lovely brown, orange and green colours, making it one of the most drab, dull looking, tired games the Knots game has ever played. Once you get to the second stage and you move away from the junkyard, you get into a little house and all the brickwork in the background is there and all the graphics change, but you've still got that exact same terrible colour palette of just washed out oranges, browns and greens. Trust me people, this is one of the most depressing games I've ever had to look at. This game's colour palette is the blandest of the bland, looking more like someone smudged your TV screen with snotty tissue in an effort to hide a bad game from you. Zooming in with the game's camera at any point, or zooming out with the game's camera at any point to check out the landscape and the level and work out where you're going, just doesn't work because as the graphics zoom out, everything becomes pixelated and that lovely drab colour palette blends everything together, making it really, really difficult to see what you've got to do next on the stages. I mean, if you want to continue playing, that is. So the main aim of Trash It is to smash your way through the rubble piles in each stage and make your way to the exit bell, hit that and you can move on to the next stage. Along the way you must collect the little Timmies in each level. Timmies are found inside breakable objects and hidden areas inside each level. The Timmies are also collected by Jack's vacuum cleaner, which at times is a nightmare to select, even though the command is just up to see. Timmies are used as currency for the game's shop, which can be accessed by pressing start on the map screen. In the shop, Jack can purchase new hammers that will help him smashing larger objects and many of the gates that block access to later sections of each stage. Because with the smaller, less powered hammers against a time limit to break these doors, you just will never win. So the idea of the game is to track down all of the Timmies, upgrade your hammer to the best it can be so you can smash your way into the next section of stages. So the premise of the game seems really simple, right? Well, that's when the actual gameplay comes into it, and Trash It has some of the worst gameplay I've ever experienced in a video game, full stop. The controls are a disorganised, clunky, really badly mapped nightmare, and I can't see any logic to the button mapping for this game whatsoever. Every time Jack gets his hammer out and uses his hammer, he can no longer jump, and he moves really slowly, so you've got to put your hammer away after everything that you do in order to be able to move, because this game is against the clock. It's not too great a feature that a game has such a punishingly short time limit for each stage. Constantly having to take out and put away the hammer begins to feel a lot more like a chore than a gameplay mechanic, and it gets old really, really fast. That same level of frustration can also be applied to the game's vacuum cleaner. Why these commands weren't just mapped to the buttons, I don't know. But instead you have to use the ridiculous button and D-pad combinations to switch between everything. And again, not very helpful in a game that pits you against a clock. You spend most of your time fiddling around with the controls. Here's your basic gameplay loop, people. Find block, switch to hammer. Break block, switch to vacuum. Clean up block, put vacuum away. Jump to next block, rinse and repeat. So now you can see just how fast this game becomes a monotonous orgy of item switching and not an orgy of destruction, as clearly stated on the back of the box. So trust me when I say that the deeper into this game you get, the more time you spend aimlessly f***ing around with the controls, achieving absolutely nothing and just frustrating yourself. So the best advice I can give anybody looking at Trash It at the moment is rather simple. Just don't waste your time in this game, it's utterly abysmal and it's just not worth your time and money in the first place. Honestly, the GIMP version of Doom that Rage Software were forced to crap out was better than this game by a country mile. And we all know what game Doom could have been if a certain someone from idSoft didn't interfere. Sadly for me, the most redeeming feature this game has is the fart noise that plays on repeat in the game's main select screen. At least they nailed that part, eh? Trash It is a total stinker of a game, especially for it being one of the Saturn's later titles. The Sega Saturn Magazine only giving it 39% is far too high a score for a game that stinks as much as this one does. What a truly terrible game we have. Well, this is the quality of the 5th place, guys. It's only going to go downhill from here. So let's check out which game is in 4th place. So yeah, that was Jack Hammer in Trash It, the 5th worst game on the Sega Saturn. Trust me guys, it's going to get worse, but I'm doing this so you don't have to play it, okay? In at the number 4 spot, we have Iron Man Exo Manowar in Heavy Metal. Probably the stupidest name I've ever read off a video game box, but trust me guys, it's by Acclaim, so it's going to be bad. Let's take a look at Iron Man. Iron Man Exo Manowar in Heavy Metal is probably the worst name for a video game that I've ever had to read. Developed by Real-Time Associates and published in 1996 by Acclaim for the Sega Saturn, Iron Man Exo Manowar in Heavy Metal is a 2D scrolling action game for 1 or 2 players. The game was reviewed by Sega Saturn Magazine in issue number 18, receiving a low score of 33%, and here's what they had to say about the game.
If Acclaim had a quality control department, all those in it should be on the receiving end of a brutal kick-in for letting this one slip through the net. Games like this have no place on next-generation consoles and will not be tolerated.
The lies on the back of the box, as written by Acclaim, are as follows. Metal Titans Iron Man and Exo Manowar come together for the first time ever to tackle one heavy-duty cosmic crisis. It's an apocalyptic meltdown of furious action with the ultimate superhero power and realism. Yes, I can smell the Acclaim BS from here, people. Whoa, what they put on the back of these games to sell them in the day. First things first, people, I recommend this only for your sanity because I went a little bit mad playing this game. If you're going to attempt to play this game, please, 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 for the sake of your own ears, turn the music off in the options before you start playing the game. Iron Man Exo Manowar features one of the most horribly noisy, grating, disgusting soundtracks ever placed into a video game, people. I know the game has heavy metal in the title, but don't be fooled here. The music is far from good. To be honest, Acclaim should have bundled this game with a health warning. So for your own safety, people, and for everybody in the environment around you, if you're going to be playing Iron Man on the Sega Saturn, do us all a favour and turn the music off. Trust me, you can thank me later. Iron Man Exo Manowar in Heavy Metal, or as Iron Man, as I'm going to call it from now on just to save valuable time, is a 2D platforming game with 3-dimensional backgrounds. You choose from Iron Man or Manowar at the beginning of the game, and if you're playing with 2 players, you can pick both of them. And from my experience, Iron Man is the safest bet if you're going to be trying to complete this game alone. Manowar can't really duck under enemy fire very well, and his blaster just tends to shoot over their heads, so not a great choice, which makes him much more of a bullet sponge than Iron Man, so stick with Iron Man, the game's a lot easier if you use him. When compared to several other Sega Saturn games that were released at exactly the same time, Iron Man feels more like a budget title. You've only got to stand it next to Manx TT Superbike or Mass Destruction, which were released around about the same time in this game, just to see how bad and low budget this game truly looks. The 3D backgrounds in this game are massively lacking in any kind of detail and essentially just look like poorly textured blocks. Any increase in that very simple on-screen geometry causes the game to slow down to single-digit frames, which can be debilitating to the gameplay, if there is any there. Luckily this doesn't happen too often, but when it does, trust me guys, you really know about it. The game's sprites are pre-rendered, digitised, horrible, blocky mess, the kind of thing that Acclaim was churning out all the time in the 90s. We know that only ever looked good in Mortal Kombat, so I don't know why they carried this one on. The sprites themselves lack any fluidity to their animations, and most of the enemies, bosses included, are tiny smudgy looking things that at best of times are just hard to make out. Iron Man and Man-O-War have a variety of different attacks and specials at their disposal, but the sad reality is that you only really need to use your blaster and your special to get through the game. All the punch, kick, combo moves and all the other combinations that you get just put you at risk of taking damage. The blaster can pick off all the enemies from a safe distance. Iron Man's jetpack can be used in levels if you double tap the C button, but beware, the fuel bar does go down rather fast as you're floating around the level. This jetpack skill is essentially great for avoiding enemy attacks, great for avoiding boss attacks, and probably the only way you're going to reach some of the higher platforms. But once you run out of fuel, you've got to remain stationary while the fuel recharges in your jetpack, and away you can go again. Many of the game's boss fights are incredibly hit and miss. Sometimes they can be really frustrating, as the bosses can cling to you like a bad smell if you let them get close enough. This is one of the few instances where the jetpack becomes essential for evading enemy attacks. Just be careful not to run out of fuel and let them get close. It's game over, Iron Man. Though most of the levels play in a left to right fashion, occasionally some will have you hunting for switches, radar jammers, or defusing explosives along the way, with the latter being one of the more annoying aspects of the game. Sometimes you can hear the explosives beeping, but you cannot see them, and the counter ticks down so fast that, honestly people, get ready to restart these levels quite a few times. Just to break up that dreadful side-scrolling gameplay, there are a couple of shoot-em-up style stages dotted throughout the game. Don't get too excited. After all, this is an Acclaim title, don't forget, and the shoot-em-up stages play just like the rest of the game does. You know, like absolute crap. Some of the game's later stages, like Forest and Mountain, seem to have lots of obstructive foreground detail, which pretty much hides all of the enemies and most of Iron Man from view. That wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't for the fact that it also obstructs the main routes through the level, making it very difficult to see where you're going, leading to leaps of faith that constantly backfire. I did end up giving up with this game by the time we got to the lava cavern stages, as too many leaps of faith were required into unseen chasms, and if you don't activate your jetpack fast enough, Iron Man isn't lava proof, and your continues run out really fast. To be fair people, I was not willing to start this game again from the beginning because it is absolutely dreadful. It is so much worse than Trash It, and Trash It, guys, was already a bad enough game. This game is the kind of drab, boring, cut and paste crap that Acclaim became known for in the early 90s. If it's a Sega Saturn box and the word Acclaim is on the side and it isn't followed by the words Mortal Kombat, Darius or Bust a Move, then chances are it's going to be a bad game that you should really avoid at all costs. The staff at Sega Saturn Magazine were definitely in a good mood when they gave Iron Man 33%. This game's only redeeming feature is when you turn off the Sega Saturn and save money on your energy bills. Not even worth using as a coaster. Absolute tripe, people. So yeah, I don't know how you can get much worse than Iron Man, people. That was absolutely awful, man. But anyway, to make it even worse, the next game, which is going to be worse, is another Acclaim title, guys. It's a movie tie-in. And at the number 3 spot, we have Dragonheart, Fire and Steel. Yes, it's Acclaim. Yes, it's digitised, horrible, monstrous movie stuff. So let's jump over to the Saturn and just see how bad this game was. So now we have the third worst rated game on the Sega Saturn. We have Dragonheart Fire and Steel. This game was developed by Funcom and published in 1996 by Acclaim. Yes, Acclaim again, so we know what's coming, people. Dragonheart Fire and Steel is a side-scrolling digitised action game based on the hit movie Dragonheart. The game was reviewed in Sega Saturn Magazine issue 19 and given the comically low score of 27%. Sega Saturn Magazine said,
"If you hadn't seen the film Dragonheart yet, playing this will hardly inspire you to do so. Parallax scrolling of the backgrounds is the most impressive aspect of this entire game."
The back of the box reads, The Dark Ages just got darker. 7 evil dragons rule the world of Dragonheart Fire and Steel. 7 fire-breathing, razor-clawed, night-devouring monsters. 7 beasts too savage for the movie. If you can cut your way through the hordes of medieval knights hell-bent on your destruction, if you can master the moves, if you can take the heat, then it's time to face your fiery nightmare. Get ready for maximum evil, medieval style. In Dragonheart Fire and Steel, you play as Sir Bowens, who single-handedly has to take down hordes of knights, mages and dragons in order to save the kingdom. Dragonheart features digitised graphics in the same way that many of Acclaim's other titles did round about that time. Games like Batman and WWF in Your House spring to mind when thinking about poorly digitised games. But alas, just like many of the other digitised monstrosities, especially the ones cracked out by Acclaim in the 90s, Dragonheart is absolutely horrible and really bad to look at. All of the characters and enemy sprites use the same drab orange colour palette, and they suffer from very limited and poor animations. The levels and backgrounds also suffer much the same fate, with a constantly repeating drab image in the background. The collision detection for both combat and level traversal is absolutely appalling. Most of the time Bowens clips through the landscape and you can see that the collision maps do not match the level geometry correctly. This makes platforming a problem when the edge of a platform isn't actually the edge of a platform. The same logic can be applied to the combat, with most swings of Bowens' sword missing enemies if you're just out of range or too close. The best tactic I found for defeating enemies in this game was to just press down on the D-pad and swing for the knees, guys. They never tend to block from the bottom and it takes most enemies out that way, the only exception there being bosses. Dragonheart's gameplay is very uninspired, boring and quite flat, with each level just scrolling from left to right and the only real objective being get to the end alive. This left me with absolutely no compulsion to learn the game's boring mechanics or controls, and I found hacking away at people's feet served me well enough to get by. The only breakaway we have from the really boring 2D platforming are the occasional full motion video sections laden with QuickTime events where you're riding Draco and you must press the correct direction. Unfortunately, the controls are so laggy and slow that I found this more unplayable than the main game. So in a vain effort to try and make this game even remotely playable or fun, I used a cheat to up Bowens' health and stamina. While you're standing still in the game, press up, R, and it will boost Bowens' stamina and health by a small amount. This is great to use because you can keep using it until the bars are full, so it's highly recommended that if you are, for some reason, playing this game, always leave the last one till just before a boss fight so you can top up your health and stamina and just get through that boss fight nice and easy, and you won't have to repeat it, and you can take this game out of your Saturn and you can throw it in the bin because it's bad. So it's either use the cheat and have a large stamina bar, or stand around for 30 seconds after you fight each enemy, or you wait for your stamina to refill. I know what I'd rather do with a game this bad. Bowens also comes equipped with a bow, which is very effective for taking out enemies from a distance, but beware people, ammunition during the levels is rather scarce, but though you can purchase some after each stage. Bowens has a special attack too. If you unleash this, you're treated to a brief pause while the game loads up the animated sequence of Draco trying to kill all the enemies on the screen. The sad thing is that 9 times out of 10, Draco's attack completely misses the enemies. This attack also, for some reason, cannot be used against bosses. So to sum up, Dragonheart Fire and Steel is an absolute abomination of a game. It suffers the same fate that many movie tie-ins did in the 90s, of being just quick cash grabs that were absolutely terrible. The kind of game that was slipped out into shops before review copies became available so people could just buy it based on the IP that was using. Absolutely terrible. Just another dull, uninspiring, dreadful looking mess of a game with zero personality, zero playability. This game is truly awful. I've got absolutely no idea how Sega Saturn Magazine got to 27%. I feel 27% is really generous. Personally, I'd review this game 20% or much less. It's a true travesty of a game. Please people, please avoid this at all costs. So yeah, that was Dragonheart Fire and Steel, people. I didn't realise we could get a game that was worse than Iron Man, but I was very wrong. That's worse than Iron Man. So moving away from that game into the number 2 spot, we've got another game with Dragon in the title. This time, we've got Blazing Dragons for the Sega Saturn. A point-and-click adventure that wishes it was Monkey Island. I mean, this wishes it was even Discworld, guys. This is a point-and-click adventure that will put you off point-and-click adventures for life. So let's take a look at Blazing Dragons. Blazing Dragons was developed by the Illusions Game Company and published by Crystal Dynamics for the Sega Saturn in 1996. Sega Saturn Magazine issue 14 reviewed the game, giving it a low score of 23%, making Blazing Dragons the second lowest rated game on the system. Sega Saturn Magazine had this to say about the game.
Blazing Dragons is one of the most cringeworthy, irritating, unfunny games of all time.
The back of the box reads as follows. Forget the sword, bring a psychiatrist. A madcap mix of celebrity voiceovers, including Monty Python's Terry Jones, bring 43 characters to life in a wild Python-esque arcade action. Fire the deadly catapult and gasp at the dragon thumb wrestling. Blazing Dragons is a point-and-click adventure similar to the like of Monkey Island and Discworld. The only problem here is the game couldn't hold a candle to those classics. The game's main protagonist is a young dragon called Flicker. Flicker is the castle's inventor, and his only dream is to become a knight so he can marry the king's daughter. That's pretty much Blazing Dragon's story in a nutshell. The game tries to be witty and funny all the time, but sadly it tries way too hard.
Yes, of course. I do the gardening around here. I trim the bushes, I trim the grass, I trim everything. And you should have seen that beanstalk before I got to it.
Sadly, the comedy, if it can be called that, is cringe at best, with only a few moments throughout the games genuinely making me chuckle.
Ollie, oxen free.
Sadly, these moments are so few and far between, with the most repeated pieces of dialogue being,
I can't do that here.
or
This isn't the time for that.
This doesn't seem to be working.
also while you're playing this game, get used to seeing the loading screen a lot as it pops up every time you do anything in the game. It is only a short loading screen, but you will see it a hell of a lot. The game's graphics and animations are a little hard on the eye and definitely what I've come to expect from these kind of point-and-click games. At the best of times it looks like it was created on an Amiga 500 using deluxe paint, and at the worst of times it looks like some real bad 8-bit art. The first few puzzles the game has are pretty self-explanatory, and the further you progress into the game the more outlandish, nonsensical and plain odd the solutions become. I had to resort to using the guide for this little review, if only to save me from hundreds of loading screens whilst wandering around not knowing what I'm doing. Put short, this game's puzzles just become more and more nonsensical as you progress through the game.
You want a crazy kid?
The game only requires 4 different commands to play, but somehow the developer managed to bodge this up and make a simple control scheme very, very counterintuitive. I mean, the Saturn controller's got 8 buttons on it, man, and for some reason they managed to map 4 inputs to 2 different buttons, making inventory access, item management and item usage way more difficult than it needs to be. The game itself is incredibly short, and one of those games that once you've completed it, you have absolutely zero replayability value, unless you like punishing jokes and cringe voice acting, coupled with nonsense puzzles. Once you've managed to drag Flicker to the end of a rather short quest, probably using a guide just like I did, you're treated to a very short and dull ending, and a piece of looping animation that even the game's characters rip on.
Why, I bet the designers took a shortcut by looping this road in 20 frames.
That explains it. Can you believe the audacity of those guys?
Sega Saturn Magazine were absolutely bang on the money with this one, people. 23% is a very worthy score for such an underwhelming game. Avoid like the plague, people. This game is just as bad as all the others we've seen so far. I wonder what's at the number 1 spot, people. Yes.
Flicker, is there any way I can thank you?
Yeah, I got an idea. You could dribble melted sapphire sauce on my... Whoa, wait a minute. I'm promised to Princess Flame.
After me, you'd forget all about that little princess.
Oh, okay.
So there you go, Blazing Dragons, people. The worst point-and-click game I've ever played in my life. Trust me, I played some of the more obscure Sierra ones when I was younger. Anyway, people, in at the number 1 spot, the worst game on the Sega Saturn, and quite possibly the worst game Knots Gamer has ever played. Yes, drum roll, people, and at the number 1 spot, we have The Incredible Hulk, the Pantheon Saga. Yes, this is officially the worst game on the Sega Saturn, people. I've played it, so you don't have to, because it's absolutely poo. Don't play it, people. Watch me play it, and then go and burn some copies, because they're terrible. Yes. Incredible Hulk the Pantheon Saga was developed by Silicon Dreams and published by Eidos Interactive in 1997 for the Sega Saturn. Incredible Hulk is officially the worst rated PAL game on the system in its entire library and was reviewed in the official Sega Saturn Magazine in issue number 18. They gave the game an amazingly low score of just 15% and went on to say,
I'm going to tell you right now, The Incredible Hulk by Eidos Interactive is without doubt the worst Saturn game I've ever had the misfortune to play. Ever. One go on The Incredible Hulk and you'll feel like you've lost your faith in video games. Your control over the limping Hulk sprite is vague, and it's often hard to tell where you are in relation to the bad guys.
The back of this dreadful box reads as follows, people. Marvel Comics' Incredible Hulk barges his way into the Pantheon saga. He encounters a team of superheroes dedicated to helping him become a hero. Hulk must use his Gamma Spawn powers to survive impossible odds against a familiar cast of notorious supervillains. The interstellar madman Trauma, the mutant Piecemeal, and the deadly UFOs. These villains make his path to heroism increasingly dangerous. Thankfully for the Hulk, the madder he gets, the stronger he gets. So from my very short experience with Incredible Hulk, I agree 100% with Sega Saturn Magazine. This is the worst game I've ever played on any 32-bit console. The music doesn't suit the game or Hulk in general. The sound effects and voices are muffled, hollow and quite funny at first, but sound nothing like you'd expect from both the Saturn itself and Incredible Hulk. The game's enemies are laughably few in number and very difficult to hit, as you can never tell if they're quite in front of you or behind you. I was expecting to be able to Hulk smash everything in sight, but sadly this is not the case here. All you get is a very horrible debris effect if you try to smash anything, coupled with copious amounts of slowdown. The levels themselves play out in a very linear way. Instead of Hulk smashing your way through things, Hulk instead has to look for switches to open doors and activate lifts. It's almost as if the developer took Hulk and dropped him into a completely different game. This style of game just doesn't suit the Hulk at all. Most of the time you're wandering around levels aimlessly looking for the next switch, lift or door to activate. This is made more difficult by the game's dreadfully short draw distance and constantly tanking frame rate. At any point in the game when Hulk has to navigate a platforming section, it always ends in complete disaster. The game's clunky controls, coupled with the appalling draw distance and constantly tanking frame rate, make navigating basic platforming sections an unbelievable chore even for our green hero. The platforming sections are made even worse once you reach the third stage with all the floating ice platforms. This is where I personally gave up with the game out of pure frustration, as Hulk just slides around on the ice and can easily slip off the edges of platforms straight into the drink. And on this particular stage, the checkpoints are so few and far between that doing 2/3 of the level, dying and having to rinse and repeat it is not my idea of fun, so I gave up with Hulk at this point. At points, the game's already dreadful frame rate, which manages at least 12 to 15 frames a second at the best of times, can tank. And I mean really tank. We're talking single digits here, and not the high ones. This has a massive impact on an already terrible game, and at times it only takes a few enemies on screen or a slight increase in the really basic geometry to grind everything to a halt. In short, Incredible Hulk the Pantheon Saga fails in absolutely every area, is completely without any redeeming features. A true travesty of a game, and definitely worthy of being crowned the worst game on the Sega Saturn, and possibly the worst 32-bit game of all time. After playing Incredible Hulk the Pantheon Saga, I feel that Sega Saturn Magazine were a little too generous with their 15% review score. I give this more like 5%. And even that's too much. A true turd of a game, people. Please avoid. Worst game Knott's Gamers ever played. The single worst game I've ever played. Okay, so avoid this one at all costs, people. I couldn't care if this had like an astronomical value to it. They need destroying every copy. They're that bad. So there we go, people. These are the 5 worst games available for the Sega Saturn. Please avoid these games at all costs. They're not valuable in any way, shape or form, and only make good doorstops, trust me. But don't let this video put you off. These are just 5 examples of terrible software from the Sega Saturn library. I've got in front of me 2 fantastic Japanese games just to show you that this machine really did kick ass back in the day, and some of the titles are just still ultimately so playable today. We have Street Fighter 03 and Radiant Silvergun. 2 of Knott's Gamers' favourite Sega Saturn games. These get a lot of play out of me. I'm not very good at Radiant Silvergun, but it doesn't stop me playing it, people. And if it wasn't for Radiant Silvergun, we wouldn't have gone on to get the fantastic Ikaruga on the Sega Dreamcast and GameCube. And that is just an amazing shooter. Honestly, fantastic game. Thanks for watching, guys. Please take care. Please avoid these 5 Saturn games. They're absolutely crap. And we'll see you in the next video. Hopefully, if it's a Saturn one, with something a bit better. Take care, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Right, let's go and burn these. We need to burn these games, yes. What?